Welcome to part 2 of this Crochet Dinosaur tutorial. If you haven't already watched part 1, then make sure to go do that. The link is in the description. But otherwise, let's get straight into it. So first up, we are going to make the arms of the dinosaur. So to begin, we will be doing 6 single crochets into the magic ring for round 1. Now for round 2, we are going to do 6 increases, which will take us up to 12 stitches. For round 3, we are going to do 5 single crochets and an increase times by 2. Now we are going to single crochet for 2 rounds straight. So from rounds 4 to 5, we're just going to single crochet round. For round 6, we're going to do 5 single crochets and a decrease times by 2, which will take us down to 12 stitches. For round 7, you're going to do 4 single crochets and a decrease times by 2. For round 8, you're going to do 3 single crochets and a decrease times by 2, which will take us down to 8 stitches. And finally, for round 9, we're going to do 2 single crochets and a decrease times by 2. Now you are going to need to leave a tail for sewing, so about this much. And we're going to pull through to finish off. And you're just going to add a very small amount of stuffing. So just a little bit. And now you are going to make another arm exactly like this so that we have 2 arms. So once you have 2 arms, we are going to put those aside and we're going to move on to the tail. So for the tail, we are going to begin by doing 4 single crochets into the magic ring. For round 2, we're going to do 4 increases, which will take us up to 8 stitches. For round 3, we're going to do single crochet increase times by 4, which will take us up to 12 stitches. For round 4, we will do 2 increases and then 10 single crochets. For round 5, we will just single crochet all the way around. Then for the final round, we will do 2 increases and 12 single crochets. So now we're going to leave a bit of a tail for sewing once again. And we're going to pull through. And now we're going to put the tail aside and move on to the scales. So we're going to grab our secondary color for the scales. And this will be the last item that we have to crochet. So to start off, we're going to do 5 single crochets into the magic ring. For round 2, we're going to do 5 increases. And then for the final round, we are just going to do 3 single crochets and a decrease times by 2. So now we're going to leave a bit of a tail for sewing, and we'll pull through to finish off. And you're going to need to make 3 more scales so that we have 4 in total. So go ahead and make 3 more scales. So once we have 4 scales, we're going to put these aside because we're going to begin sewing. So to begin the sewing, we're going to first of all grab the body and also grab the arms. So we're going to be sewing the arms on either side of the head and the body. So we'll be sewing them into this round, in between the rounds where we started the head and finished the body. So we're going to be sewing it right there. So we're going to grab our yarn needle, and I'm just going to put my hook into this point, and I'm going to pull through. And then I'll put my needle into the other side of the arm and pull through. So this is how I want it to be positioned. And we're going to go back into the body and back into the arm multiple times until we are happy with how it looks. So once we're happy with how it's sewed on, we'll just bring the yarn tail to the back, where we'll sew it to the other one later. So now we're going to sew the other arm on the other side exactly the same as we did the first arm. So now we're going to bring the yarn tail back to the same point as the other yarn tail. And then we are going to tie the two together and then cut them off. So this is what it looks like from the side when the arms are sewed on. And this is what it looks like from the front, which is a little bit funny. And now we're going to sew the tail on. So we should be sewing it on so that the bit after the ending stitch sits at the top, because that's where we did the most increases. And we'll be sewing it on just above the legs, so about here. So grab your yarn needle. And we are also going to be adding a little bit of stuffing as we sew, but we are going to be just sewing around the tail. So I'm just going to go into here for the first point. And then back into the tail. And we just need to keep sewing round the whole way. So once you're satisfied with how the tail is sewed on, I'm actually going to bring the tail in between the legs because there's some holes down here which I haven't sewed up from connecting the legs earlier. So I'm just going to bring my tail down here and I'm just going to sew up those holes. Once you've done that, I've just brought the yarn tail through to a random point in the body and I will just cut it off. So this is what the dinosaur looks like currently. And now we can move on to the final part of sewing, which is sewing on the scales. So you're going to grab your scales. So I'm going to show you my pre-made dinosaur to show you how the scales should be positioned. So the scales will be positioned starting nearly at the top of the head, but not quite, and going all the way down to the tail. So I'm going to begin by sewing the first one onto the tail and then slowly moving upwards. And there should be a little bit of a gap between each scale. So I'm going to grab my first scale and I'm gonna grab my yarn needle and I want this scale to be positioned on the tail. So I'm going to go into this stitch in the tail and a stitch further up and we're just gonna pull through. And then we're going to go into the other side of the scale and pull through. And now I'm slowly going to sew around the scale and go into each and every stitch and make sure that it is secure on the tail. So this may mess up the tail's shape a bit as we are sewing into it, but it's okay, we can just use a yarn needle to shape it back up properly soon. And once we are happy with how the scale is sewed on, we are just going to bring the tail off to the side so that we can sew it, so that we can tie it to another tail soon. And I'm just gonna reshape my tail a little bit to make sure it is curved. And this is what the first scale looks like when sewed on. So the next scale is going to go about here, so below the head but above the tail. So approximately here. So we're going to go ahead and sew that on, just like we did with the first one. So this is its positioning. So once we are happy with how that's sewed on, we're going to bring the tail to the same point as the other yarn tail, and we're just going to tie these two together and cut them off. So now it's time to sew on our last two scales. So the next scale will be here, just above the beginning of the head. So just about right here. So I'm going to go ahead and sew that on. So I've just brought the tail through to here, and once we sew the final scale on, we'll bring the other tail to there and knot them together. So the final scale will go just around the curve of the head, so a stitch or two above the last scale, and it should sit like this. So we'll just go ahead and sew that on. And to finish off, we'll just tuck these two tails inside. So this is the finished dinosaur. I really hope that you enjoyed crocheting your dinosaur. I really actually loved making this pattern. It's super cute and there isn't too much sewing, which is good. If you would like the written pattern, then it will be linked in the description below. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching and I will see you in the next video. Bye!